All right, so here we are, episode 4. And I am talking about that time I was married to a sex offender. He was not a sex offender when I married him. Important to note, just for clarity, he became one after I married him. For I was married to him, yes, in my early 20s. So let's get into it. I think the first question I want to answer for myself is why tell this story? And I think the answer applies to everything about my life that why I would tell any of my story of the things that I've said or things that I've been through. It's not because and I wrote this down, it's not because I'm presumptuous enough to think that everyone will want to hear it, because everyone wants to hear it. No, or it is not because I think my story is the worst of the worst. And maybe my story can be an encouragement to you. So it's not for either of those reasons. I'm not mocking anyone who does it for those reasons that they think people might want to hear it. But they're just not mine.
Yeah.
I feel like with this story and with any that I share from my life, the Holy Spirit can use it to highlight things, truths I share, lessons I learned, events that I experienced, even some of my reactions. He can highlight them and speak into their lives in a really personal and individual way. They may not have even experienced anything near what I have, but yet he can still speak truth into their lives. And he is the tool, for those who are less familiar with the Holy Spirit's role. He is the tool. Jesus said, I'm leaving the earth after he rose from the grave. 40 days later, he said, I'm going to go to ascend to heaven, and I'm going to, so that the Holy Spirit can come. The Holy Spirit is the part of the Godhead who is here, who is actively working. He is our radio transmitter to heaven and to the Father's heart. And so he's the one transmitting his thoughts and his ideas. He's the one that sends dreams and visions and communications. He gives us impressions and leadings and promptings. He's the one who is here and active in our lives. So I may say I have a personal relationship with Jesus, but that's all filtered through the Holy Spirit.
Right.
So he is the one I believe that can bring something to someone's attention as I'm speaking. So I really lean into that, and that is why I share what I do, and why it isn't just for shock value. That time I was and that time I was, that's kind of fun.
Right.
But it isn't for those reasons. My heart really is for this, and so that's the reason I openly share these things. The other thing is, I think the other primary reason, there may be several reasons, but the other primary reason is that I feel like amazingly enough, the Lord used these stories in my life to make me who I am. I don't believe that is his best. Like, his heart is not that we would suffer and struggle and then become better people for it. It's just that he has this beautiful way of overcoming evil with good, and he has this amazing way of turning all things out for our good, which is both are scriptures. And so I like watching that in my life. I like watching it and hearing it in other people's lives, that amazingly he does this amazing thing. And in my particular case, he just began to use it for preparation of my destiny and my calling, and he used it to form who I am. And I was always going to have to be formed into that person.
Yeah.
Are you already crying? She's already crying. She's already crying.
I'm just thinking.
He was already, my point was, before she started crying, that he was already going to form this person in me. He was already going to have to mature me. He was already going to have to reveal to me who I was. And so he does it in this beautiful way. You find yourself in this terrible mess, and it's not always your doing or your fault. You find yourself in this situation, and then I have been watching him do this through some pretty harrowing events in my life, watching how wow, I thought while I was going through it that it was just the worst of the worst.
Yeah.
And I felt I was really suffering, but then began as I've matured with the Lord over time, I'm just waiting now what's going to come out of this. I'm just waiting for
Yeah.
the outcome, because it's going to be amazing. And so even though that was not his original plan or his original design, it is beautiful how God can take the elements of this life, the broken elements, the enemies, the things the enemy tries, the things that end up happening in life, and he turns them, and you come out shining, like you come out mature, you come out beautiful, you come out people can't even believe what you've been through. And that's not always the testimony that you hear,
Right.
with people who are not walking with the Lord, or they're having to do it sort of the hard climbing. I went to therapy every day, bless their hearts, and they worked really excruciating hard
Yeah.
to become the people that they are.
Yeah.
And so I've had the benefit of him being there every step of the way.
Yeah.
So I also do it because it's a testimony to the Lord of his goodness in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a little bit of the story to lay some foundation here. I was in my early 20s and met and married a guy who was actively involved in my church. He came in as the youth pastor. He was a worship leader. He'd been to Bible college. He was, if you were a Christian parent and you had a checklist of the most ideal candidate for your daughter, he marked every check, 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 check. That was it. A devout, God-fearing.
The poster boy of Christianity, Christian men.
There you go. The poster boy of Christian men. And if you want to say, if you had a checklist of everything pure you ought to do and ought to be before you marry, we also marked all of that off, right? I had fasted and prayed before I, agreed to marry him. That's just so. How could you get any more ideal than that?
Can't.
You can't. You
Yeah.
really can't,
No.
right? Holiness was just oozing out my pores.
Mhm.
Just purity and holiness and goodness. And then there was, I fasted. Oh, I took a ton of material, Christian material, on singleness and marriage, and a good marriage and a healthy marriage, and what that looked like, and struggles that people have in marriage, and what singleness is. And so just to make sure I was healthy and mature and really knew what I was doing.
Yeah.
And still, and I wouldn't say, looking back, that I was too young. I think that the things that I encountered, I would have been too young at 35. Like, I think I was too young is not the correct language. I think that I was as adequately prepared as someone is going to be for a marriage. There were some maturing I needed to do. There was some growing I needed to do, but I would have had to do that married or unmarried. I don't think that, someone could look and say, I don't think you could really, you were too young. No, actually, I wouldn't say that. So, I also, another thing that checked off the list, we were friends for 2 years, worked together closely in ministry. So you can see them in all sorts of lights and under stressful, different stresses and different environments, and you see them interacting with people. So just like, we're talking.
You got to marry your best friend.
Oh my
You guys group
gosh.
dated more or less even before you even knew you were dating.
Yes, exactly so. I think I read the book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye. I mean, we're talking. I was ideal. I was just the ideal. It was the ideal. And I think that was something I had to come face to face. I mean, it was not, I think. It was something I had to come face to face with in my life, that you can do everything right and things can still go wrong. And it does not guarantee your outcome. And even though I'd been taught you reap what you sow. So if you sow this, you will reap this.
Right.
And that is true. The Word of God says it. It's true. We see it. But it doesn't apply in every situation. And those were eye-opening moments for me when it didn't, my outcome was not good, and it did not guarantee me a good outcome.
Mm-hmm.
So for a good Christian girl, that this just was mind-boggling. So anyway, we took all the right steps, and then I was in Bible college, and so he moved to the city, and where I was attending Bible school, and we got married before, in our hometown, and then came
Mm-hmm.
and settled in to married life. We drove up there on our wedding night, and this was going to be it. We're going to start our life together while I went to Bible college, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess I would have to classify, just to classify this period of years that I was married to him. And we are obviously not married any longer, but I would have to classify those years as, I've had a couple of dark eras in my life, and it was only a couple, thank God, but it was one of them. It was one of the darkest times of my life. And quite frankly, it's because I was out of my depth, almost from the minute I said I do. I just had no idea what normal was, and it was never normal again. And I was completely unprepared for what happened, I had no idea. I had no, some people talk about marriage, that like I just didn't have the tools in my tool belt to even have a mature marriage, or to be able to communicate properly, or to work through differences in our personalities.
Mm-hmm.
That was not even on the table. Like I didn't know, I didn't have language.
Mm-hmm.
And if you asked me how things were going, I would have said, I think they're going fine. I think this must be normal. These
Mm-hmm.
struggles, these challenges, these things that are happening behind closed doors, they must be what everyone's talking about when they say marriage is hard work.
Right.
This must be what they're talking about. And
Mm-hmm.
so they must be saying that it's like this. And you would think I would have my own parents' marriage or other marriages I had seen to
Mm-hmm.
fall back on as some sort of model. But there was enough shady there. I didn't, quite
And
frankly.
you can only see so much, even when you
Mm,
do see other marriages.
that's true. You don't
So,
always get the behind the closed doors conversations.
yeah.
You don't always see the physical interaction. You don't always see the struggle before you were born.
Right.
You don't really know quite. You just don't have all the specifics. You're absolutely right. Not only that, I don't want to throw my mother under the bus too badly, but she would get angry and she would yell. I mean, there were times she would raise her voice, and so you're not quite. She would get. There were times she would get enraged. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
a few times that she reached a real raging point, and so you think, well, that's
Just
kind of
happens.
what happens sometimes. And she was a good woman, and she's a godly woman, and sometimes people get pushed to their limits, and so you're more willing to throw compassion at. You're more willing to show grace. You're more willing to normalize what's happening to you, because it doesn't cross any obvious lines. It
Right.
doesn't cross any obvious lines to you. And nobody ever talks about this stuff. And so you're like, what? I was just out of my depth.
What's okay and what's not
What's okay?
okay.
What's not okay? And nobody
Yeah.
had, I didn't have anyone that I respected enough to
Mm-hmm.
confide some things that were happening behind closed doors.
Yeah.
Um, one I will say was a lot of missing time. He would get upset and then just leave for the night, right off. Like there was no honeymoon period, and well, we're so in love, and then we start getting on each other's nerves. I don't even know what that looks like. This was like the first night.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so mad. I'm going to leave, and just leaves. Takes off, puts his wedding ring on the back of the toilet and leaves. Like there was an emotional, an emotional statement that was constantly different emotional statements that were being made
Yeah.
that communicate a message to you without even saying the words.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no talking it through. That was, even though I would try.
Yeah.
It was impassioned and angry and frustration, He would, you know, that from the first night, just a lot of missing time that began to happen over a period of months. And you're like, I don't really understand what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe he's just out cooling off. Like my dad might get a, you know, you hear this, you're just like, I'm not quite sure. My dad would maybe need to go for a walk to cool
Yeah.
off a little bit. He got a
Mm-hmm.
little hot under the collar.
Mm-hmm.
And
He's
it
gonna
was
go
always,
cool
it was a little
down.
bit of tension in a little bit of tension in the home. And you're like, oh, dad's a little upset, but he went off for a walk and then he comes back and he's all calm. So that's what you immediately, being very innocent, knowing this person for a couple of years, that's immediately what you assume. Like you assume the best of someone, you do not assume the worst.
Right.
And so being more innocent and of an innocent nature, I'm going to think with more love than that. But I just didn't know.
Yeah.
So within a short period of time, just to cut the story short, of course, we moved away from family and friends in our church community because we were starting a new life together. I'm in Bible college and I'm finishing up my ministerial degree in ministerial studies of all things. And I'm heavily involved at school. I'm on the worship team. I was taking acting classes at an acting school there in Dallas, Fort Worth, and so I'm really busy. I'm involved. I've got friends, but anyway, all this secret stuff that was happening, this tremendous tension in my home,
Mm-hmm.
a tremendous unhappiness. I remember one lady calling me up. She was just eager to know. She'd been a friend of ours, and she said she was just eager to know how married life was treating me. And I was like, it's fine, you know. I really didn't know what to say. I guess nothing exciting to report.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what she was looking for. And she was like, it really is kind of the same before and after, isn't it? And then I just sort of agreed with her. Like she found marriage to be surprisingly boring. She had really thought it was going to be something special, and then it
Right.
hadn't. So she was sort of looking for some sort of confirmation that like maybe she had just made a bad decision for herself. And then to hear me say, I guess it's not much different. She was like, oh, okay, I'm going to have to accept. She kind of came to the conclusion, I'm going to have to accept that this is
just what marriage
is just
is.
boring. It's not nearly that she had kind of souped herself up on something.
Right.
But I remember walking away just sort of in a daze. I think for a long time, I was just out of my depth.
Yeah.
I was in a daze. I did not know what was happening. I just didn't know. I didn't know if this was normal or not normal or what was going on.
Yeah.
So, of course, eventually the truth came out that he had a serious issue that had been ongoing for some time and had not let me know and hadn't let anyone know in his life. And so he would go out and just he would expose himself, and he was driving around at night in the city, and it was becoming a bigger and bigger problem in his life. It was becoming more and more depraved. And that was just one of his issues, is that he would do this. And so eventually he was caught. He was caught in a school zone with 3 minors, young women. And he was, at that point, it had developed to such a point that he was rolling down the window, speaking to them, like interacting with them, which he hadn't always done. It was something that began to develop. So they, of course, after they were very disgusted, he drove away. They called the police, and of course, he was arrested.
Mm-hmm.
We were evicted within 24 hours. We lived in an apartment complex where there were children, and the rules were really strict.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
For obvious reasons.
for obvious reasons. And of course, my life completely changed from there because Texas law is also very, very rigid, and they are rigid on their criminals, and so it was even more rigid than other states. I've known some other offenders and stuff since then through ministry,
Mm-hmm.
and some different offenses and people who had to register as sex offenders and so on. And realized, whoa, we got it severely. We had we got some severe probationary terms and so on. Anyway, so I went my whole life completely turned around in a 24-hour period. my family didn't know hardly anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I still don't think that they have heard, and I have a large family. I still don't think to this day, because I've just moved on with my life, I don't think that they know all the stuff I'm about to say. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
they've ever heard the story. They've maybe heard a snatch here, a snatch there. That's it. And it wasn't that I silent for a while. Yes, I was so ashamed, so embarrassed, so out of my depth. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't really know. I was just trying to find who I was going to be in the middle of it, how I was going to
Right.
respond to
How
this
do you
situation.
respond to that?
Yeah, and there was no one I felt I could run to that I felt had the maturity. All of my siblings were my age or younger. Well, all of them were younger,
Mm-hmm.
and had no life experience. And I wasn't. It was just too embarrassing.
Yeah.
And there was just no one to open up about. So there was many years actually before a few years before I then told, began to people became more and more aware of some of the people in my life became more and more aware of something was up, or he was on probation, or that there were certain restrictions that we lived by, and certain classes that I took to be able to live with him. If he wanted to be around children, if he wanted to go to church, there were just certain restrictions
Mm-hmm.
imposed on him all the time. And if I wanted to see my nieces and nephews and have him along, I had to become a chaperone. And so I had to take certain classes. And besides that, aside from that, I was also, I was just, it introduced me to an entire world. I grew up very, very fast. It introduced me to an entire world I was completely unaware of.
Mm-hmm.
So I took some classes in criminology and criminal thinking. I read some books on it, and some psychology classes. I just wanted to understand this better. He was also taking psychotherapy, court mandated psychotherapy, for several years, and he would come home. He was a very communicative person, believe it or not, and even apart from some other troubles he had,
Mm-hmm.
that was one thing. He would just talk about everything. I was spared nothing, and so he belonged to a support group
Mm-hmm.
of men who had like some of the worst, most depraved problems that you can imagine. Just let your imagination tell you and fill in the blank, and that's what some of these men struggled with. And he would tell me what they said that night in their session, and what the counselor said, and
Mm-hmm.
he would. So I became very exposed to something that was way, way advanced and way beyond my depth,
Yeah.
and opened me up to a level of, we're talking complete loss of any innocence I had before then, and completely exposed me, ironic that word, exposed me to an entire underworld
Uh-huh.
that I did not know existed. I mean,
Yeah.
married wives sometimes stumble into the world of porn. They're
Right.
like, you know what, I discovered. Or they
Mm-hmm.
discover it through their sons. Uh-oh, Junior's, been
Yeah.
tucking some magazines under his mattress. That isn't I got thrown in the deep end
Yeah.
of the worst
Of sexual depravity.
of sexual
The
depravity known
darkness.
to our society,
Wow.
and was still so young, still so very young. So, wow.
It's no big deal.
Not only was my world, my natural world, turned upside down, because there's a whole lifestyle that comes along with being a sex offender.
Right.
And he was serving out an extended probation. He did do some time, and all of this happened within a space of just a couple of years, and no one knew. I kept it a complete secret. I kept it secret from my very large, very close family, very close to them, and I kept it a secret from my job and my bosses and all my
Yeah.
coworkers, all my friends. No one knew.
That in and of itself is a work of because you're just constantly not telling people certain things because it
Mhm.
may lead to certain other things.
Yes, you're always
Always on the guard.
filtering, always
Yeah.
on guard.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that came with it. So, of course, my life was very different. And then the crime and the arrest. And then, as you can imagine, there was a lot of financial challenge surrounding this because we had to post bail, and he had a $70,000 bail. His bail was posted at $70,000.
It's a lot of
So
money for the average Joe.
yeah, and so then you go to a bail bondsman, and they can
Right.
reduce it. They can reduce that as long as you swear to appear in court and do all your good stuff. But even then, $10,000 was just a huge amount
Still a
for
lot.
a pair of newlyweds.
Mm-hmm.
This all happened within the first year. All of this happened in the first year of marriage. He confessed to the police that he had done this. He assumed that he estimated he had done this over 300 times. So this wasn't a new thing. This was not,
He had been doing it before your marriage.
well, years before.
Yeah.
This was over a span of time, and it had begun to slowly deteriorate, or deteriorate his addiction.
Mm-hmm.
There were other things that occurred, though, and because, again, way out of my depth at that time. But later, as you learn more, as I started learning more, as I started growing a little bit older, and of course I got thrown in the deep end, so I'm learning as quickly as I can
Mm-hmm.
to try to understand what's happening. And I am not a mental health expert. I did eventually take a job for a few years in working for the leading bipolar scientist she was a leading female bipolar scientist in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked with a team of psychologists, and they were my friends. Some of them were my friends. A team of research scientists who dealt with schizoaffective disorders and mental disorders. And so I became very, very educated without being, I'm obviously not an expert.
Mm-hmm.
So I became more aware even of mental illness and the different kinds. I would sit and ask my boss questions at lunch, and I would ask her about, and she would explain it to me in layman's terms,
Mm-hmm.
so that I could understand a little bit better about mental illness,
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of get a grip on this whole universe that I had never ever known.
Right.
And then you have to. This isn't even like, how do I apply Christianity to this? How do I apply the Lord? Where does faith begin and science end? And all these questions that you come to. I was very young, and then I'm trying to find my way through it.
Right.
But there were things I became aware of over time. I would not dare to diagnose him, but I do know that because he was very communicative.
Mm-hmm.
I do know that he had some of the symptoms of a psychopath, because he would say that he called it get into a zone, but just it meant, what he meant by that was that he would just not remember where he was at or what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't that he was enraged or flew into a rage. Sometimes,
Yeah.
rage can do that to someone, like, oh, I don't remember what I did. They really were so enraged that they just kind of spaced out.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, he would just have, you might say, like a blackout, and
Right.
he would get into what he called a zone, and he could not remember. He would just kind of wake up and realize, what am I doing in this school zone talking to these young ladies? And so he would have just these blackouts, and he missed some of his missing space of time was missing for him also.
Wow.
And so that is again, I'm not trying to diagnose him. He was seen by several therapists and psychotherapists. He was tested extensively as part of his probation, and in order for him to live freely on the streets on a regular basis. I mean, I told you tonight, he took a polygraph once a month. Like they kept an eye on this guy.
Yeah.
And wanted to know if he said
Was
boo
it-
diddly. They were
Uh-huh.
wrong. They wanted to know. Our computers were searched regularly. They
Oof.
want to know. They wanted to know everything. However, he was never officially diagnosed as a psychopath,
Mm-hmm.
but I knew later, just having gathered information, I knew that he did show some from living with him
Mm-hmm.
and from some of the descriptions he told me. Honestly, he was upfront with me
Yeah.
about some of his behavior. I realized, he has some tendencies, or he
Yeah.
has some signs, some
Mm-hmm.
symptoms.
Right.
Characteristics is the word I'm looking for. He
Mm-hmm.
has some characteristics of a psychopath. So, wow. So, wow. Way outside my depth.
Hello,
Way.
marriage.
Just regular marriage, right? And other ladies, you're going to work with them, and they're like, my husband, he's such a slob. All men are. Men are just slobs. They leave their underwear laying around, they leave their clothes laying around. He's just a slob. And I
Yeah.
was like, yeah, that is just not what's going through my head right now. That is just not what I'm dealing with at home.
Right.
He was, if anything, very clean
Mm-hmm.
and very, very clean. He washed the walls of the bathroom. He
Wow.
was a very clean and tidy, meticulous person. So I'm like, yeah, no, I'm just not dealing with normal here. I don't know what to make of this.
Right.
But you start to gather more information. You get a clearer picture, and I did. I started getting a clearer picture of what his struggle was and what I was dealing with. I wasn't able to speak about it so clinically as I am now,
Mm-hmm.
right? I have the benefit of many years,
Yeah.
years of talking about it and thinking about it, and many years with the Lord processing it. And I was just so young. You're still sort of just drinking out of a fire hose. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what life was like for several years. Then you have all of the regular things of youth. I moved to the city for the first time. I'm driving in the city. So many of my life experiences at that age or that era they are just like everyone else at 23 and 24.
Right.
You're like, this is
Everything is
scary and
big and a
big.
lot.
And yeah, and you're taking life in big amounts for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there was that too on top of it.
Right.
There were, a life with him extended way beyond just this crime, and the challenge is with him was way beyond the crime. It was way beyond the results of probation and these really strict, rigid restrictions. It was more than a loss of freedom. He also had some other issues, some other major issues. One was, and I won't touch too much in going on into it, but just to give somewhat of an idea, some of the other issues, he began to fly into rages. He would fly into rages, not frequently, not a lot. Every 3-6 months,
Mm-hmm.
over the course of our relationship, he'd fly into a rage, and these would be, his voice would reach a really high pitch, like just so enraged. So they weren't just an outright attack. They were just, I'm blowing up. You felt like his head was blowing up, and his voice would reach this really high pitch, and he was just
You could like hear the tension
you
in
could
him and see it.
this squealing almost.
Wow.
When Scripture says that they fell on Jesus with weeping and gnashing of teeth, when they fell on Paul and weeping and gnashing of teeth, I'm like, yeah, I can imagine they were. I can imagine that because I've kind of witnessed it.
Mm-hmm.
And then he did, even though he started out as a great Christian guy, within a very short period of time, his language began to deteriorate, and then he's just like swearing at you and hurling darts at you in horrible language. There was no getting away from him in these moments either, unfortunately, because I would just walk out of the room.
Mm-hmm.
I never escalated. These were not fights that escalated.
Yeah.
Again, that's the marriages that you hear other people describe.
Mm-hmm.
These were not fights that escalated. They were frustrations he would begin to voice, and you'd think, oh, okay, we just need to talk this out. He's frustrated about something, and then it would begin to ask very, very quickly.
He would
And
kind of
he would
escalate it
he
within
would escalate,
himself,
and he
and
would leap quite a lot of degrees very quickly. And
yeah,
then before you know it, and he would say, this has been building, like it's been building. But he would also add classic abuser language. He would add, this is on you. This wouldn't be happening if you didn't, if your behavior didn't provoke it.
yep,
And you didn't provoke it in this moment, but you've been provoking it for months. And if
mm-hmm.
you understood, and he said this frequently, if you understood that how tolerant I've been and how forbearing I've been and how patient I've been with you, you would understand, you would be able to understand what I'm going through.
Yep.
So this was definitely turning it on
On you. It's all
me.
your fault.
It
He's angry.
was all my fault. So there, I'm living with that. I'm
Mm-hmm.
living with that. And so he would. Now, he never touched me. He
Mm-hmm.
never laid a hand on me. And like I said, and I'll come back to that because I want to make a point there. I would walk out of the room. I would
Mm-hmm.
just walk out of the room. I don't have to tolerate this. I'll just walk out. You need to cool off. Like,
Yeah.
you may not be able to cool off. You've reached a point, to such an escalated point that you can't cool off. And I can walk out.
Yeah.
And he would follow me. Like, there was no getting away from him.
Mm-hmm.
If I went outside, which I remember on several occasions doing, he would follow me outside. And there was no like hiding it from the neighbors. He
wasn't embarrassed or ashamed of it. He just was there.
He was just out of control.
Yeah.
Which is a dangerous place to be because you don't know if there is a day that may come where
Yeah.
he crosses that line. You
Mhm.
don't know if that moment will happen.
I feel like going out and doing that in front of the neighbors is already kind of crossing a line where if he's willing to do that, who knows
Yeah.
what will happen next.
And the thing is about this is that it can begin to develop. Sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
For some men, for some women, it never develops beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's always that danger. There's the danger that it can. I think what is interesting in this situation, and part of what kept me bound in a few areas for a while, is that the enemy knew, and the enemy does often in our lives, he knows your line. He knows the line, and he will walk you right up to it, but never cross it. And if he had ever touched me, I wasn't that woman. You ever lay a hand on me, baby, that was a line that was clear to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have had no issue.
Right.
I don't care how attached you are to me or me to you. I do not care who you are or what you've done. I may be willing to support you through this crime. I may be willing to support you through your issues. And the enemy knew that. He knew my lines.
Mm-hmm.
And so that line was never crossed. And so there I stayed.
Yep.
And it isn't the only reason that I was there as long as I was,
Mm-hmm.
but it is one of the factors is that, if somebody would say, well, has he ever committed adultery?
Mm-hmm.
And has he ever laid a hand on you?
Yeah.
And these are the church's bottom lines.
Yep.
These are our bottom lines. These are the bottom lines that I had. These are the bottom lines. And if that's crossed, well, then I have grounds.
Mm-hmm.
Until that, then we're supposed to, love never fails.
We're supposed to keep them. We're supposed to be there for
it's
them.
It's hard work, but you stick it out. You go to counseling.
That's
you do
just what marriage
takes,
is.
and that's what marriage is. So there was the devil knew, at least he knew that, and I've seen that not only in my life but in other people's stories, that they were like, well, I stayed in this situation because it never crossed this line.
Yeah.
And I knew if it ever crossed that line, and I believed them,
Mm-hmm.
but the enemy knows our lines, and so there you stay. You stay there, and you stay there. So life with him was very challenging. There were a few instances where just in his anger, he was so upset that, I could have gotten hurt just because he was throwing things around. He wasn't throwing them at me, but he was throwing them around, and I very easily could have gotten hurt. So it was never completely free of like, oh, I was never in any danger. No, it could have gotten quite bad.
Mm-hmm.
It could have. There's no getting around that.
Even that isn't so close to the line where it's like if he had started throwing things at you, that would have been probably a push, maybe.
Uh-huh.
But it's just in the room somewhere else.
Uh-huh. Right. So again, a line. But you never know.
Yeah.
And so to gather my thoughts here and decide where I want to go from here,
Mm-hmm.
that was my life for a while. I'm trying to decide. I can go two different directions here. What was some of the thinking that kept me there, and what was some of the thinking that set me free? I think one of the things I want to say first and foremost, from I was, when I entered that marriage and that relationship, I was very committed to following wisdom, to following hope, and following destiny. I wrote about this in a short story, an allegorical story. I just uncovered it this weekend and was reading back through it again. And I was very committed to following those three things, which not all young people, that's very admirable. That's admirable that I was very committed to those things. I was the epitome of a young Christian adult. I didn't do as like others, and I wrote all this down, and expected life to provide miracles for me. I didn't feel entitled. I knew I was going to have to go out and put some action to my dreams and my goals, and I wanted to be a doer, right? I wasn't expecting life to come to me. I was going to have to be assertive. And I'd already decided all of that, and those were the things. That was the course I set for myself, even walking into this relationship. I didn't pursue selfish quests or absurd notions. I always tried to, pursue substance and to be sound of mind and to do things well. Those are the things I wrote. I girded myself with good character and moral values, because I thought this is how you are successful in life. This is what you get told, even if you're Christian or non-Christian. These are the things that guarantee you a successful outcome, is that you have good character and moral values, and you define what those are, and then you stick to them. You stick to them, right?
Yeah.
You don't fall to weakness. And a lot of people's story is that they were like, yeah, I just, I had bad character, and they've been spending their life trying to work past their bad character. But I started out like, these are the things I was set pursuing, and I was determined. And every decision I made was guided by wisdom and hope and destiny. Like, is it my destiny or isn't my destiny? And these are the things that we see movies touch on these things. We hear people's stories, and they're like, whether they did or didn't follow hope, they kept hope alive, or whether they did or didn't follow wisdom, or whether they did or didn't follow their destiny. I just knew it was my destiny, and so I did it, and I set out. And so I did all of those things.
Yeah.
And looking back years afterward, I said to the Lord, I wrote it down, and I said, I have still found myself here, empty-handed, lost, directionless, doubting myself and everything I have ever done. And it was such a dawning moment for me that everything, following those things, did not guarantee me a good outcome in life. Following those things, I believed in the Lord. I loved the Lord. I had a good relationship with him. If you had asked me in my early 20s, I would have said, absolutely, I love the Lord.
Yeah.
But these were the things that were guiding my path. These were the values that I built my world upon and walked into that marriage with. And when all hell broke loose, you start to question, what more can you do? What more can you do? What do I base my life on?
Yeah.
What's
true anymore?
What is true anymore? How do I navigate through life? How do I ever even hope?
If these aren't the answers, what are the answers?
What are the answers?
Yeah.
And that's really what I came to. What are the answers?
This obviously isn't working.
Because this didn't work.
Yeah.
this didn't work. This was an absolute disaster. And I walked into a destruction zone.
Mm-hmm.
And I've said this to you recently, that, and we laughed. I walked into the relationship much healthier than just a few years in.
Mm-hmm.
By the end of a few years, even though I was moving as quickly as I could to learn all I
Mm-hmm.
could and to grow as fast as I could, I still living. I really did say I feel like a demon has gotten loose in my life, and I don't know how it happened.
Mm-hmm.
I do not know how it even got loose, but it is loose. I had given authority to a person in my life who had an obvious demon in his,
Mm-hmm.
who could suggest and use him, and just poor guy, he was being destroyed by the demon that was using him.
Right.
Obviously in horrible torment in his soul, uh, and yet we're still trying to pretend we're living ordinary life. We're still trying to pay the bills and go to family get-togethers and have dinner with friends. And I mean, we're talking. It looked totally normal.
Yeah.
Uh, um, it looked completely sane, and yet it was totally insane. So I did. I mean, there were so many things in my life during that period of years where I felt I knew that something had just was so off. One thing, I was in. I think I don't want to miscount. I think I was in 7 accidents. No. I was in 7 accidents in 5 years. Car accidents. 7 accidents in 5 years. Just there were just all kinds of these things where I did not feel I was living a blessed life.
Right.
However, I knew somehow my instincts were picking up that it had to do with him.
Yeah.
I never outwardly like flung that at him,
Mm-hmm.
but I just was like, it's because I knew the Lord. I knew how the Lord
Ever
operates.
since I got married to you, I've been in 7 accidents.
Right.
Right. You're not saying
I
that.
didn't use it as a case against him, but I was just being I knew the Lord. I knew the Lord's character.
Mm-hmm.
I knew how he operates. I was being blessed. I was getting amazing jobs. I was getting pay increases like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I was well liked. I was gaining favor everywhere I went. Had just fantastic. I was working for one of the fastest growing churches in the United States,
Mm-hmm.
and worked in the pastor's offices. I've mentioned it in another podcast. I'm working in the pastor's offices at the top.
Mm-hmm.
I'm I'm esteemed. I'm in an esteemed position.
Mm-hmm.
There are ministers who I had their cell phone numbers. I through my job, I met Dallas Cowboy football players. I met some celebrities. I met
Mm-hmm.
celebrities through my profession, through my professional position as a pastor's assistant
Yeah.
at this church. Amazing. The Lord was blessing me. However, I had this terrible, terrible secret that I was sitting on. And I felt like privately my life was just not blessed. It was just black as can be. So now I've described this life, the life that I had. I've described the decisions the thinking I went into it with and how it all failed.
Yeah.
And then the story becomes, from there, what lessons did I learn? How did I get out of it? And I have to give all of that to the Lord, all of it to the Lord. First of all, I want to say how he gave me Romans 4:13-17. There's so many things that he said through this, and that I learned. But one thing I want to address is this thinking that I went into the relationship with, and ultimately ended up saying, wow, you can do everything right, and that does not guarantee your outcome.
Mm-hmm.
From that moment on, I will say one thing that was birthed in me is tremendous compassion. Because I hear people say, yeah, I blew it, and now I'm paying a price for it, and I know it. And I'm like, well, you can still do everything right and you can still get the same outcome. So I can't really, I can't really judge you. I can't really, for me, it just gave me a tremendous compassion
Mm-hmm.
for whether people are successful or whether they're failures.
Right.
I'm just like, yeah, well,
Whether it was their fault or whether it
whether it was your
wasn't.
fault or wasn't your fault, it also makes you suddenly aware that there are people out there who may be genuinely struggling, and it
Yes.
is not their doing. They didn't bring it on. It isn't their fault. One of the things, I'm going to jump around. I always do, but I'm going to jump around a little bit. One of the things that kept me bound for a while is that the thinking in the believers around me, the thinking in the church around me,
Yeah.
the thinking in the conversation. And boy, I'm listening. I'm listening for anybody who might have a little bit of insight. You better believe I was.
Yeah.
I'm listening for somebody who is living in a real place and dealing with real challenges in their life, not just that their husband left dirty underwear around. I want to hear, and I'm frustrated because he uses my kitchen table as his office. I'm listening for somebody that I can relate to a little bit and didn't hear any.
Yeah.
It has only been since I think the rise of the internet, that more, and like YouTube, where people will
Right.
make
Sharing their
clips and share their
experiences.
experiences, and you hear a lot more of people are less afraid, and their therapy has become more popularized, and so they're just becoming more vocal. People are becoming more vocal about things that happen behind closed doors. But this just wasn't discussed, or
Yeah.
at least the people around me were not saying those things. They were
Yeah.
voicing other things
Right.
and other thinking. And so I thought, there is no way they will believe me, for one thing. I didn't think I would be believed if I come to them complaining, that it would look like a complaint. Well, you've got marriage as sacrifice. Well,
Or they'll try to dumb it down at least. Like, it's probably not that bad.
Yeah, it's probably not that bad. You need to go in there and show love. Da 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 da.
What are you doing that's making
What do you
do that?
Yep. What are you doing to provoke this situation? What can you do to de-escalate this situation? It's on you to take responsibility.
Have you read what a Proverbs 31 woman is?
Yeah. I didn't feel that I would be believed.
Yeah.
I didn't know that I would, get an objective thought. And I still wasn't quite certain for a long time whether this was kind of normal. Like, because
Right.
it just came in so strange. It came in a unique way. And I was just young enough, and life was already just big enough that, the enemy snares you. You get caught in a snare and you're not quite sure. I'm not quite sure.
You start thinking it's normal when it's really not.
Yep.
Because you don't know.
Because you don't
It's your
know.
first time.
Yeah, it's your first time for anything.
Yeah.
Your first time just getting out there. So you don't know.
Yeah.
You don't know. So I wasn't so much impressionable as I was completely out of my depth. So one of the things the Lord gave me was Romans 4, which I want to share, and then I'll get into some other things that he gave me. This is in the Message translation, and these two scriptures radically changed my life. So, if those who get what God gives them only get it by doing everything they are told to do, it's still going to make me cry. And filling out all the right forms properly signed, that eliminates personal trust completely and turns the promise into an ironclad contract. That's not a holy promise. That's a business deal. A contract drawn up by a hard-nosed lawyer and with plenty of fine print only makes sure that you will never be able to collect. But if there is no contract in the first place, simply a promise, and God's promise at that, you can't break it. This is why the fulfillment of God's promise depends entirely on trusting Him and His way, and then simply embracing Him and what He does. God's promise arrives as a pure gift. That's the only way everyone can be sure to get in on it. And I remember when I came to the end of my road and I said, I did all these things. It became down to a conversation with the Lord. And I said, I've done all these things. I followed all these things, and it still led me to this absolutely dead end. I followed love. I did everything right. He said, there were a couple things he said to me. And he said, I want our love to be your purpose. I want our love to be your purpose. And he said this right here. He began to eliminate the thinking um, that of doing everything right, and instead turned my focus on him and on my trust in him, my reliance upon him instead of my reliance upon myself. I will never criticize parents for wanting their kids to follow wisdom, hope, or destiny. I don't think that those messages are bad in and of themselves. I just think that they are not complete, and they are not placing my trust in the Lord, his way of doing things. They're not placing my hope in my trust in his promise. And what is his promise? What is his promise to me? And that's what I'm going to pursue.
Yeah.
And then also simply embracing him and what he does. And what he gave me at the end of this journey was an opportunity to fall madly in love with him. He just said, let my love be your purpose now. Let my love be the thing that you pursue. Let our love together, just let me journey with you. Let me journey in life with you. Let me partake in everything that you do, in every move that you make, in every step that you take. And even though I had fasted and prayed, I'd done all the right thing, this was far more intimate. This was far more personal. And this made me love him so much. I had told him part of that conversation. I had said, are you going to tell me that like you've got some great gift for me? Because that's not really because I had really come to the end. I was like, I have noticed that I'm not any more talented than anybody else. I can always find someone more beautiful, more talented. I haven't really distinguished myself the way that I thought. It was a real moment of failure.
Yeah.
A real moment, a real wake up moment. And I said, so what are you going to like blow smoke in my ear? I've been pursuing that. I've been pursuing that hope,
Right.
that dream, that idea, that destiny that I believe that, the Lord told me since I was little, I was going to do great things for him. All these things that we're taught, even in Christian circles, the hope that people put in you, that of course people believe in you, and you get out there and nothing happens. You fall on your face. It's an absolute disaster zone. I really thought I must have blown it somewhere.
Yeah.
I blew it somewhere. Don't even know when I blew it, but it blew past me and I didn't even know it.
Yeah.
And now I've ended up with nothing.
Yeah.
And I'm so empty-handed. And I said to him, like you've got some big gift you're going to give me, or you're going to give me this revelation that I'm super talented, right? Like, and I am super talented. And he was very direct with me. And he said, no, I'm not going to tell you that. I'm not going to tell you that you have a tremendous talent or a tremendous gift to the world that you haven't discovered yet, or I'm going to give you a tremendous gift. And he said, I will never forget it. He said, you are the gift I'm going to give to the world. The gift is you. The heart I want to give to the world is you. It's you that I want, not your gifts. I want you, and you are the one that I am calling. You are the one. It radically changed the way that I looked at myself, the way that I looked at the good works of Jesus. It radically changed the way that I went after, pursued things.
Yeah.
And what I was really after. It set my value, a new value I'd never had before. And it also restored my own sense of value that I was radically changed by that conversation. And he, of course, doesn't just give you one. He keeps this up. This is an ongoing conversation. The revelation of your personal value, your heart. And he would say that. He would say, it's your heart I want. It is your heart I plan to give to the world. And it will come through these machines of artistry and illustration. It's going to come through talents, but I don't care a hoot about those things. In the end, what I care about is the heart that is running those machines. I care about you. And you are what I want. And I felt my value come, up by 1,000,000. You couldn't have after that. It branded me.
Yeah.
And because he got to me in a moment where I had so little value left.
Yeah.
He just, oh my gosh. I was always going to have to learn that. I was always going to have to get that. We all do.
Yeah.
But not only did he restore my value, but he upped it. And in the years after that, as people would challenge, because people do, they challenge your value. They say, they try to assess you. They say these things.
Yeah.
I was like, no, this is so branded in me. You have to understand, you weren't there. You weren't there in my moment. You weren't there in my weakest hour. And people they always do. I'm not the only life that people will tell you. They'll try to assess you, and they'll say, I think your problem is this, or I think you struggle with this, or I've watched you long enough, I think, and they'll be really set. They're very convinced. They've reached their conclusion about you.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they, because they don't see you in the light God sees you in, you can't continue with them. But they will. But I would know. I would be like, no, I know what my issues are. I know what my issues have been. I have faced them.
Yeah.
And I know what my issues are. That's not it. Okay? I don't know where you came up with that conclusion. I can't seem to talk you out of it, but that's not it.
Yeah.
Because I knew I had come face to face, and then the Lord set the record straight. And also, it made them lose their power because they weren't there in that moment of tremendous weakness. They weren't there when they didn't know what I've been through.
Yeah.
And they didn't know what he brought me out of. And so I'm sorry, you just don't get as much say as, and these were sometimes leaders, these were sometimes family members. I'm like, I'm sorry. I will only give you so much speaking room in my life, so much because you have no idea. You have no idea.
Yeah.
The darkness that I have looked into and came out the other side. And it was very young. It was, and it caught me very unexpectedly. And it was happening in secret. And nobody knew.
Yeah.
And so years later, when I would interact, I'd be like, nah, you got it wrong. You got it wrong. It gave me an empowerment because the Lord reached me in a moment that was black. It was black. He was able to, what else do you want to say, Lord? When the Lord gives you value, it's going to take a lot for the enemy to ever be able to steal that again.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean he can't. It doesn't mean he can't, but it would take a lot. It's going to take, because it's sealed.
Yep. It's
sealed inside of you. So that's what I walked out of it miraculously intact. I did not walk out of that relationship broken. I did need some emotional rest. I needed some rest. I needed a lot of rest. I was pretty shaky, just even physically. My nervous system needed some rest. But the Lord had done such work in the last couple of years, through a series of events, a couple of people, a series of events that the power of that he held over me had already been broken.
Yeah.
I think that's as far as I'll take it tonight because I could talk for 6 hours and I want people to be able to finish this podcast without being exhausted.
I mean, I don't know if exhausted would be the right word.
I don't wear them out. I'm nevertheless. Also a favorite word of Meg's that I use all the time. Nevertheless. All right, well,
I'm going to go eat some honey drowned biscuits after this.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah.